Hi guys, so I wanted to share a little bit about the Fertility Awareness Method today and what makes me so jazzed about it. So whenever I hear people, practitioners, talking about certain things that they're really excited about, I love to hear their personal story and what got them so excited about it. So I thought that's what I would share with you today. So I first learned about fertility awareness when I was in acupuncture school in 2009, and I just learned at that time about basal body temperature tracking, which is when you take your temperature first thing in the morning when you wake up. And what this can do is help you to assess if you are ovulating and if your progesterone levels are staying high enough to sustain a high temperature after you ovulate. So my experience of that was somewhat limited because I would often forget to take my temperature. I was 24 at the time and kind of all over the place, very young 24-year-old. And so at that time, I was also working with an acupuncturist outside of our school clinic and then also within our school clinic as well, and getting all sorts of herbal formulas, acupuncture treatments, and they were also making diet and lifestyle recommendations to me, which mostly included eating more meat, eating more overall, reducing my exercise, stopping running, not doing hot yoga anymore. And all of these things were really challenging for me, and partially because I was struggling majorly with an eating disorder. So I had been diagnosed with anorexia a couple of years before that, but I think I had been struggling with it for much longer than that, but it just hadn't gotten to a point of being diagnosed until I was 22, I believe. And so I wasn't very open about my eating disorder. I still really wanted to hold on to it, and I didn't want to think that anything was wrong with me. So I don't think I shared too much with the practitioners at the time that I was struggling so much with it. I did have a therapist at the time, which she was not helpful at all. She was mostly just encouraging of me only eating kale and sweet potatoes, which I will never understand. But anyways, story for another day. So I was learning about tracking your BBT and seeing that nothing was really happening with my chart when I would remember to take it, and kind of just tabled everything while I was in school and was just trying to fill my brain with all this information that I was learning about Chinese medicine and acupuncture and also Western medical anatomy and physiology and all the things that we have to learn during acupuncture school. It is a pretty intensive program. So then I ended up moving to California in 2011 and I got my period back. And the reason I think was because I really appreciate a fresh start. I kind of tend to be a person that moves every couple of years, and I think it's because this sort of stagnant energy and getting used to things, I tend to get bored. So I was excited about this new endeavor, and I was like, I'm not gonna have an eating disorder anymore. Fuck it, I'm just not gonna have an eating disorder. I'm not gonna exercise like crazy. I'm gonna just eat whatever I want and whatever I feel like, and I did that, and I got my period. And shortly after, I just wasn't able to sustain that. It wasn't my natural tendency. I was just sort of like, cool, I got a period, good for me, and then forgot about it, and then just went back to business as usual, which is unfortunate, but I carried on with that. I would kind of just like get a period here or there randomly. I don't even really know why. And then after I graduated from acupuncture school, I fell into a deep dark hole with my eating disorder. I think it was just, I had been in school for my entire life. So I went directly from undergrad into acupuncture school. I think I just kind of lost my sense of purpose and routine and was just like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna be a professional anorexic person. So unfortunately, that's what I did. And it was a really dark time of my life. But ultimately, I ended up going into my first residential treatment center at that time. And I did end up getting a period after that as well, which was amazing, but I quickly left the program with both my middle fingers up in the air saying, I'm not doing this anymore. Unfortunately, I relapsed really hard, probably was even worse off than I was before going there. And if anybody that's watching struggles with or has struggled with an eating disorder, please reach out to me. They have a very close place in my heart, obviously, and there's a lot that I can recommend and things that I maybe would have done differently if I could. So anyway, then I ended up going back to treatment again because I relapsed really hard, and then a couple of other years passed, and it just kind of went back and forth of relapsing and going back and getting support and relapsing and, So my most recent time of being in residential treatment really did the trick, and I went through the whole program. They have a residential program, an IOP, which is intensive outpatient, and then, partial hospitalization first, and then intensive outpatient program. And then you go into outpatient working with a dietitian and a therapist and potentially a medical doctor, depending on your needs. So I did that and I got my cycle back again. And that is when I first met Lisa, who is my Fertility Awareness Method teacher. And I did her mastery program at that time. It's a group program and I loved it. It was amazing. And I learned a lot. But at the time, I wasn't fully ready to integrate everything that she was suggesting. I really didn't want to eat meat. I really didn't understand the cervical mucus tracking and charting. I think I just wasn't quite ready yet. But I did learn a lot, and I was able to start working with some of my clients on tracking and charting their own cycles. But it always felt like I don't fully know exactly why that might be, and everything kind of looks okay on your chart. But this most recent mentorship program that I did to become a certified Fertility Awareness Method mentor and educator is a whole other level of understanding. And so that is what I'm working on in my personal cycle right now. And I've taken a number of women through the program as well. And I have learned so much about my own body, so much about the female body in general. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that I'm currently working on. So the first thing that we look at is the overall cycle length. And my most recent cycle was 44 days long. So that is long. So the accepted cycle range is from 25 to 34 days. So my cycle falls outside of that parameter. So I'm working on decreasing the length of my cycle. And I'll tell you in a little bit about how I plan to do that. So the reason that my cycle was so long is because I ovulated really late in the cycle. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk about the bleeding phase. So the next thing we look at is the number of days that a person bleeds for. So the accepted range is 3 to 7 days. And I bleed for 5 days. So I fall within normal parameters for that. And I don't have any pain. I don't really have any PMS. And the blood is a medium flow and there's no clotting. So I'm good to go on all of that stuff. But those are all things that we would be looking at in assessing your overall health and well-being. And then the next thing that we look at is cervical mucus production. So in my first cycle back after I had my daughter, I didn't have very much cervical mucus at all. And then the next cycle, I had a little bit more. And then the next cycle, I had even a little bit more. And that's pretty typical that once you're implementing these changes, you'll see these gradual shifts towards a more optimal state. And so the accepted range for cervical mucus production is 2 to 7 days of cervical mucus production. Most women have 5 days. And that's where, if you've ever heard that women can only get pregnant 6 days out of the cycle, it's because of those 5 days where you're producing cervical mucus, and then ovulation day itself makes 6 days. So if you're somebody that only has 2 days of cervical mucus and then ovulation day, there would only be 3 days of cervical mucus, or 3 days that you could potentially get pregnant. And that's really important to know, especially if you're older, if you're closer to 40 or even beyond. Sometimes women, as they get older, they tend to produce less cervical mucus. So you really need to target having sex at the right time and really understand your cervical mucus in order to make sure that you time sex correctly to optimize your chances of getting pregnant. So I did have that normal amount of cervical mucus, and then another part of that is that you should have at least 1 day of peak quality cervical mucus, which is that like egg white, clear, stretchy, and or lubricative sensation. So you should have at least 1 day where you see that for the entire day. And the entire day in this method is defined as being at least 4 times that day. So I did fall within normal parameters for that. And then ovulation should occur sometime between days 10 and 23. So as I mentioned, my cycle was really long because I ovulated late. So I ovulated on day 34. So that's later than day 23. So that's what made my cycle so long. And I think that the reason that that's happening is because I'm still a little bit nutrient deplete from my many years of having an eating disorder, and then also being pregnant and then breastfeeding. My daughter is still nursing. She's 2.5. She's not nursing a ton, but she's still nursing a little bit, and we have been nursing this entire time. So that's been a continual energy expenditure on my part as well. I continue to exercise, and yeah, like I said, I think that I'm not as nutrient replete as I could be. So I think the late ovulation is due to that. and something that I am continuing to work on, both with increasing my intake, reducing my movement and exercise, and then also taking some targeted supplements. In particular, liver capsules has been my main. In this most recent cycle, I upped my dosage from 6 capsules a day to 8 capsules a day. So I take 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon to get to 8. And I do think that my most recent cycle, I don't know if the full length yet because I'm still in my luteal phase, but I did ovulate earlier and I had more cervical mucus. So I think that increase in dosage of the liver capsules really helped too. So yeah, then ovulation days 10 to 23, I'm outside of that normal parameter. And for this most recent cycle, I ovulated at day 28. So it was still outside of what's optimal, but I'm getting better. So I'm moving towards what is more optimal. And then my luteal phase in my most recent cycle that was completed was only 10 days. And so the luteal phase should ideally be between 12 and 14 days. And that's an indication of your overall progesterone levels. So that's why it's really important. So it's really important for people that are wanting to get pregnant because having high enough progesterone levels is essential for being able to sustain a pregnancy and also for being able to get pregnant because the implantation process takes 10 days. So if your luteal phase is just barely 10 days, then it's a little bit risky to only have a 10-day luteal phase to allow for that whole process to take place. So it's better to have a buffer on the end of that 12 to 14 days to make sure that you are able to complete that implantation process and then sustain that pregnancy. So for somebody like me that is not wanting to get pregnant right now and potentially not ever again, I'm not really sure about that, but for somebody like me that's not planning pregnancy in this moment, I'm still really curious about what's going on with my luteal phase because I want to make sure that my health is optimal. And progesterone is really important for bone, brain, heart, all of types of different parts of your body. It's really, really essential for all of those being healthy and in their best state. So it's not just important for people that are wanting to conceive, which is why I am continuing to work on the length of my luteal phase. And yeah, so hopefully I'm only on day 4 of my next chart luteal phase. So TBD if it will be longer. I do think that it will be because I have increased the amount of protein that I'm consuming only by probably about 10 grams. So I still might need to do a little bit more than that. And I have also increased the dosage of the liver capsules, as I mentioned. I've also reduced my exercise levels. What else? I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Also, this cycle, I'm planning not to steam during my luteal phase. So I typically practice yoni steaming sort of like all the time. I love it. I always prioritize doing it at the end of my period. So to clear out any spotting and make sure that everything's cleared out really efficiently, I always do that. Sometimes I steam around ovulation if I feel like it. And then a lot of times I try to steam every single day of my luteal phase. And the reason for that is because I historically had really painful periods at certain times in my life when I've had the odd one here or there. They could be really painful and I'm afraid of that. So I steam to prevent that. And this most recent cycle, I steamed every day of my luteal phase. And I wonder if maybe that was a little bit too much circulation for my system. So I'm going to not steam in this luteal phase and see if just by not promoting so much circulation, my cycle will lengthen a little bit more. And no matter what happens, I think I also might try steaming with my strengthening blend, which has more like astringing herbs to kind of help lift. And I use it a lot for people that either have short cycles or that have heavy bleeding or potentially like a prolapse type situation. So I might try that to kind of support my uterus and my overall womb space to see if I can lengthen out my luteal phase a little bit more too. So that's what's super fun about learning the fertility awareness method, is that it empowers you to experiment and really see in real time, how do these changes make a difference for in what I'm seeing in my chart. So you could, especially having been in the yoga world for such a long time and being an acupuncturist, there's this sort of listen to your body and only do it if it feels good to your body. But it can be really confusing, especially with eating certain things or moving in certain ways. The way that we feel in our body is so impacted by our mind as well, that it makes it a little bit more challenging to kind of suss out like the physical experiences that we're having. Is it because of what I'm thinking about it, or is it because of what's actually physically happening from that thing? And so I feel like fertility awareness method charting is just kind of an ability to look into the changes and what they're actually doing inside of your body, which is an objective reading rather than something that's a little bit more subjective than how you feel. I do think it's really important to pay attention to how you feel as well, though. And that actually reminds me of another symptom that I've been experiencing in my cycle is having really bad nipple pain. And that is not something that I've ever experienced before. It was painful to breastfeed my daughter at the beginning, and then has been pretty straightforward since then. But once I've started ovulating, it could even be like a week or more that I have a lot of pain at ovulation. And I don't know if it's also because I'm still breastfeeding and I'm more aware of it because that's happening, or if that was something that I maybe struggled with before, but I just didn't notice because I wasn't breastfeeding. So I'm also going to be talking with Lisa about some other strategies, but what I have decided to do now is to focus on estrogen detoxification and making sure that my progesterone levels are high enough to kind of counteract the effects of estrogen. And I've also cut out dairy this cycle. I'm not planning on doing that forever. I don't think that would be sustainable for me, but I'm just kind of curious to see what that does and if it makes a difference. I'm also increasing the amount of cruciferous vegetables, which help with estrogen detoxification. And I will be doing lots of castor oil packs too. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I hear my daughter has just woken up, and hopefully this was helpful, and I'll provide another update once this cycle is over.